The twin moons of Valkyrie shone brightly over the great celestial arena, a structure built from shimmering blackstone and glowing energy lines. Thousands of alien spectators filled the seats, their voices mixing into a roaring wave of excitement. The celestial tournament was about to begin, a battle where the strongest warriors of the galaxy would compete for glory, honor, and the hand of Princess Lyra. The Zoran race was powerful and proud. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for centuries, believing themselves to be superior to all others. Their warriors were fast, strong, and trained in combat from childhood. To win the tournament was to prove oneself as the mightiest of all. And this time, Prince Selrath, the finest warrior of his generation, was expected to claim victory. But tonight, there was an unexpected challenger, a human. The arrival of a rival. Commander Jason Holt stood in the center of the arena, his sharp blue eyes scanning the crowd. He could feel the weight of their stares, their disbelief. To them, he was an outsider, a weakling, an insult to their traditions. Humans were new to the galactic stage. They had fought hard to earn their place among the stars, but they were still seen as lesser beings by many powerful empires. Jason didn't care what they thought. He wasn't here to prove anything to them. He was here for Lyra. Princess Lyra sat high above the arena in the royal balcony, watching the contenders below. Unlike the rest of her people, she did not laugh at the sight of the human. She was curious. "Why is he here?" Lyra asked, turning to her father, Emperor Zorvak. The Emperor, a massive Zoran with dark silver skin and piercing golden eyes, frowned. "Perhaps he seeks glory, but he will find only defeat. A human cannot match the strength of a Zoran warrior." Lyra wasn't so sure. The first challenge begins. A deep voice echoed through the arena. "Warriors, the first trial begins. Step forward and prove your worth." The first challenge was not a battle, but a test of endurance and willpower. The contestants had to cross the path of fire, a long, narrow bridge suspended over a field of molten lava. It was not just about running across. It was about surviving the traps, the heat, and the merciless energy blasts that would strike at random. The moment the signal was given, Prince Selrath took the lead. His body moved with grace and power, dodging energy blasts and leaping across the collapsing sections of the bridge. Other Zoran warriors followed, their powerful bodies built to withstand extreme conditions. Jason was not as fast, nor was he as strong. But he had something else: intelligence and adaptability. He studied the pattern of the energy blasts, predicting their timing. Instead of charging forward like the others, he moved strategically, stepping at the exact moment when the blast paused. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the human outmaneuvered some of the strongest Zoran warriors. He wasn't winning by strength. He was winning by thinking. A growing rivalry. Selrath reached the end of the bridge first, landing smoothly on the platform. He turned, expecting to see Jason far behind. Instead, he saw the human only a few steps away, landing right after him. The prince's golden eyes narrowed. He had ignored the human at first, believing him to be no threat. But now, standing this close, he saw something in Jason's eyes that angered him: determination. The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some were in shock. Some were offended that a mere human had made it this far. But in the royal balcony, Lyra found herself smiling. "He's not like the others," she whispered to herself. The challenge continues. The next trial was about to begin. Selrath stepped closer to Jason, his voice low and filled with warning. "You should leave while you still can, human. This tournament is not for your kind." Jason smirked. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." Selrath clenched his fists. This was no longer just a tournament. It was a battle for pride, for dominance, and for the princess. Lyra watched from above, sensing the tension. She had a feeling this was only the beginning of something much greater. As the drums of the next trial echoed through the arena, one thing was clear: The rivalry between the alien prince and the human challenger had begun. The celestial arena was alive with excitement. The first trial was over, and the warriors who survived now stood on a great stone platform, waiting for the next challenge. Prince Selarath stood tall, his golden eyes burning with quiet anger as he stole a glance at the human, Commander Jason Holt. Jason was supposed to fail. He was supposed to be nothing more than a weak outsider who would embarrass himself and leave the tournament. And yet he had survived the path of fire, showing not just endurance, but intelligence. Selarath clenched his fists. This was unacceptable. High above the arena, Princess Lyra sat in her royal seat, her bright violet eyes watching Jason with interest. There was something different about him. He was not just fighting to win. He was thinking, planning, and adapting. That made him dangerous. That made him interesting. Her father, Emperor Zorvac, remained unimpressed. The human's luck will run out soon. Lyra wasn't so sure. The second trial, the Pillars of Strength. The next challenge was announced. Warriors, step forward. The Pillars of Strength await you. Before them stood 5 towering stone columns, each over 50 feet high. At the top of each pillar sat a glowing energy orb. The challenge was simple. Climb the pillars, retrieve an orb, and return to the ground without falling. Simple, but deadly. The pillars were covered in spinning blades, shifting platforms, and energy traps that could throw a warrior off balance. The first warriors to complete the challenge would earn points toward the final round. Zelrath smirked. This test was made for Zoran warriors. They were faster, stronger, and more agile than any human. This time, Jason wouldn't stand a chance. The race begins. The signal was given. The warriors sprang into action. Zelarath leaped onto the nearest pillar, his claws digging into the surface as he climbed like a predator. Other Zoran warriors followed, their movements swift and precise. The crowd cheered as they ascended effortlessly, dodging the swinging blades and jumping over the moving sections. Then they turned their attention to Jason. The human did not climb like the others. Instead, he paused and observed the pillars. He studied how the platforms shifted, how the traps moved in patterns. He was calculating the best way up. Zelarath reached the top first, grabbing the glowing orb and smirking down at Jason. "Too slow, human," he called out. Jason ignored him. Then, with precise movements, Jason ran straight up the side of the pillar, using a combination of jumps and well-timed grabs to avoid the spinning traps completely. Instead of climbing like the Zoran, he moved like a tactician, using speed and timing instead of brute force. The crowd gasped as he reached the top faster than expected, grabbed the orb, and began his descent. Zelarath landed first, throwing his orb onto the platform with a look of triumph. But just seconds later, Jason landed right beside him. The prince's smirk vanished. Lyra's eyes widened. "Incredible," she whispered. The challenge was over. The warriors who failed to retrieve an orb were eliminated. Only 10 competitors remained, including Jason, a prince's pride. As the warriors stepped off the platform, Selarath turned toward Jason. He was done ignoring him. This human was not just lucky. He was a real competitor. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Selarath said, stepping closer. His tone was sharp, filled with tension. Jason smiled. Not clever, just efficient. The prince's jaw tightened. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by a human. Strength wins battles, not tricks. Jason shrugged. "You're right, but battles are won by the one who makes fewer mistakes." Zelrath's eyes burned with silent rage. This human was not just competing, he was humiliating him. Before Zelrath could respond, Princess Lyra spoke from the royal balcony. "You both did well," she said, her voice carrying over the arena. "But the tournament is not over. The real battles begin tomorrow." Jason looked up at her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was something there, a spark of curiosity. Zelarath noticed it too, and that infuriated him even more. The challenge ahead. As the warriors left the arena, Jason knew things were about to get more dangerous. Zelarath was no longer just another competitor. He was an enemy now. Tomorrow, the real battles would begin. No more endurance trials. No more tests of skill. The next challenge would be combat, and Jason would have to prove, once and for all, that humans were not weak. The night before the combat trials was silent. The celestial arena was empty now, the roaring crowd replaced by the cool breeze of Valkyrie's twin moons. But in the warriors' quarters, tension filled the air. Jason Holt sat on his bed, his hands wrapping a strip of cloth around his wrist. He had survived 2 challenges, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Tomorrow, the tournament would enter its most dangerous phase, the combat rounds. He wasn't afraid of a fight. Jason had been in plenty of battles before. But this was different. The Zoran warriors were stronger, faster, and built for war. If he wanted to survive, he couldn't rely on brute force. He had to outthink them. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You should leave while you still can, human." Jason looked up. Standing in the doorway was Prince Zelarath. The Zoran warrior had his arms crossed, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light. His powerful frame radiated confidence and danger. Jason smirked. "You keep saying that. Yet, here I am." Zelarath stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. "I don't know what game you're playing, but tomorrow will not be a test of tricks and clever moves. It will be battle. You won't survive." Jason stood up, meeting the prince's glare. "We'll see about that." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air was thick with unspoken challenge, rivalry, and something deeper, pride. Finally, Zelarath scoffed and turned away. "Enjoy your last night, human. Tomorrow, I end this joke." Jason watched him go, his smirk fading. He knew Zelarath meant every word. Tomorrow, they would fight, and only one of them would walk away victorious. The first combat trial. The next morning, the celestial arena was alive again, filled with the roar of thousands of spectators. The combat trials had begun. 10 warriors stood in the center of the arena, each waiting for their matchups to be announced. The rules were simple: one-on-one battles, no weapons, only skill and strength. High above, Princess Lyra watched closely. She had spent the night thinking about the human challenger. He was different. He was unpredictable, and that made her curious. Her father, Emperor Zorvac, sat beside her, unimpressed. "This will be the end of the human," he muttered. Lyra wasn't sure. A deep voice echoed through the arena. First match: Commander Jason Holt versus Groktal of the Stone Fangs. The crowd cheered as a massive Zoran warrior stepped forward. Groktal was a monster, nearly 7 feet tall, his muscles like steel. His fists were the size of a human's head. Jason stepped into the arena, rolling his shoulders. He could hear the laughter from the crowd. They thought this would be over in seconds. Jason had other plans. The fight begins. The moment the battle started, Groktal charged. Jason barely dodged as the giant Zoran's fist smashed into the ground, cracking the stone beneath them. If that hit had landed, it would have broken Jason in half. The crowd roared with excitement. They wanted to see blood. Groktal swung again, his powerful arm moving like a hammer. Jason ducked and rolled away, barely avoiding the hit. He couldn't afford to take even one punch. Instead of attacking head-on, Jason did something unexpected. He stayed back. The Zoran warrior growled in frustration. "Fight me, human." Jason smirked. "You're too slow." The insult angered Groktal. He charged again, swinging wildly. Jason dodged left, then right, forcing the Zoran to keep chasing him. Slowly, Jason noticed something. Groktal was getting tired. Zoran warriors were powerful, but their fighting style was aggressive and energy-draining. They expected quick, brutal fights. But Jason was dragging this battle out, forcing Groktal to waste his strength. The crowd began to notice. Jason waited for the perfect moment. As Groktal lunged forward again, Jason sidestepped, and then drove his knee straight into the Zoran's ribs. The warrior stumbled, his breath catching. Jason followed up with a sharp kick to the knee, forcing Groktal to drop down. The crowd gasped. Jason didn't let up. He jumped onto the Zoran's back, wrapped his arm around his thick neck, and squeezed. Groktal struggled, trying to shake him off, but Jason held on, cutting off his air. The stronger they are, the harder they fall. Moments later, Groktal collapsed. The arena was silent. Then, cheers exploded. The human had won. A prince's fury. High above, Lyra smiled. Her father scowled. "Luck," he muttered. Zelrath, however, was not amused. His fists tightened. This human was proving himself again and again. And worst of all, Lyra was watching. The next match was announced. Prince Zelrath versus Khazor the Unbroken. Zelrath stepped forward. His golden eyes locked onto Jason. He did not speak, but the message was clear. "Your victory means nothing. When we fight, I will destroy you." Jason only smiled. He was ready. The celestial arena was filled with the sound of roaring cheers and excited whispers. The crowd had just witnessed something unbelievable. A human had won his first combat match. Jason Holt stood tall in the center of the arena, catching his breath. His fight against Groktal had been difficult, but he had used his speed, intelligence, and endurance to win. Now, as he stepped back to the side, he watched as the next match was about to begin. High above, Princess Lyra leaned forward in her seat. Her violet eyes were fixed on Jason. He had proven that he was not weak, that humans were more than what her people believed. Her father, Emperor Zorvac, remained unimpressed. "A single victory means nothing," he muttered. Lyra wasn't sure about that. Her attention shifted back to the arena as the next match was announced. Prince Zelrath versus Khazor the Unbroken. The moment the prince's name was called, the entire arena erupted in cheers. Zelrath stepped forward, his golden eyes burning with silent fury. He hadn't forgotten Jason's victory. The fact that a human had just earned a place in the combat trials was an insult. He needed to remind everyone, including Jason, who the true warrior was. Across from him, Khazor, a towering Zoran warrior with dark red skin, cracked his knuckles. "This will be fun," he growled. Zelrath did not respond. He simply lowered his stance, his muscles tensed like a coiled predator. Then the battle began. A fight of fury. Khazor rushed forward, swinging a massive fist toward Zelrath's head. But before the attack could land, Zelrath disappeared. The crowd gasped as the prince moved with unbelievable speed, dodging to the side and landing a powerful kick to Khazor's ribs. The force of the strike sent the warrior stumbling backward. Zelrath did not stop. He followed up with a brutal uppercut, his fist slamming into Khazor's jaw. The red-skinned warrior barely had time to recover before the prince spun around, delivering a devastating roundhouse kick that sent Khazor crashing to the ground. The fight was over in seconds. Silence filled the arena. Then, cheers erupted. Zelrath stepped back, barely out of breath. He had made his point. But as he looked up, his gaze locked onto Jason. "I will crush you, human." Jason only smirked. Not today. The challenge ahead. The combat trials continued for several hours. One by one, warriors fought. And one by one, many were eliminated. By the time the sun had begun to set, only 4 warriors remained. Prince Zelrath, Commander Jason Holt, Varrock the Blade Dancer, Zyra of the Iron Claws. Tomorrow, the semi-final matches would take place, and if Jason won his next fight, he knew exactly who he would be facing in the finals. That night, as Jason rested in his chamber, a soft knock echoed through the room. He opened the door and froze. Princess Lyra stood before him. She was dressed in a flowing dark blue robe, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked at him with curiosity and something else. "You fought well today," she said. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect a human to win." Lyra smiled slightly. "No, I didn't." She stepped closer. "Tell me, why are you here? You know this tournament is dangerous. Why risk your life?" Jason's expression softened. He could have said glory. He could have said honor. But instead, he spoke the truth. "Because I won't let people like Celerath decide who is strong and who is weak." His voice was calm but firm. "Humans have been underestimated for too long. If I can prove that we belong among the stars, I will." Lyra studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I hope you do," she whispered before turning to leave. As she walked away, Jason knew one thing. Tomorrow's battle would change everything. And the final fight against Celerath was inevitable. The celestial arena was alive with excitement. Today, the semi-final battles would take place. The crowd was louder than ever, eager to see which warrior would make it to the final round. Jason Holt stood at the edge of the arena, his mind focused. Only 4 warriors remained: himself, Prince Celerath, Varrock the Blade Dancer, and Zyra of the Iron Claws. The first match was about to begin. A loud voice echoed across the stadium. First match: Commander Jason Holt versus Varrock the Blade Dancer. The crowd roared as Varrock, a tall and lean Zoran warrior, stepped into the arena. His movements were fluid, like a dancer preparing for a deadly performance. He was called the Blade Dancer because of his speed and precision. Even without weapons, his fighting style was sharp, swift, and dangerous. Jason knew this fight would be different from his last one. He couldn't just outlast his opponent. He had to match his speed. The battle begins. The moment the match started, Varrock attacked. He moved like lightning, his fists striking in rapid succession. Jason barely dodged the first 3 punches, but the 4th one clipped his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through his arm. The crowd cheered as Jason stumbled back. Varrock smirked. "You are strong, human, but you are too slow." Jason exhaled. He couldn't fight this opponent like a brute. He needed to use his mind. Instead of stepping back, Jason moved forward. He blocked one punch, ducked under another, and then slammed his elbow into Varrock's ribs. The Zoran warrior grunted in pain, but quickly spun around, delivering a kick to Jason's chest. Jason hit the ground but rolled away just in time to avoid another attack. The crowd gasped. This was not just a fight. This was a battle of skill. Jason got back to his feet, his heart pounding. He could see patterns in Varrock's movements now. The warrior relied on speed and momentum, never stopping, always flowing. Jason smiled. What happens when you break the rhythm? Varrock lunged again, his attacks coming in rapid strikes. But this time, Jason did not dodge. He stepped into the attack. Instead of avoiding the hit, Jason caught Varrock's wrist and twisted, sending the Zoran off balance. Before Varrock could recover, Jason slammed his knee into his stomach, followed by a powerful uppercut to the jaw. The Blade Dancer collapsed. Silence filled the arena. Then, cheers erupted. Jason had won. Jason breathed heavily, his muscles aching. He looked up at the royal balcony. Princess Lyra was watching him. But more importantly, so was Prince Celerath. Jason smirked and raised his fist in victory. Celerath's golden eyes burned with fury. The human had made it to the finals. And now, nothing would stop the prince from crushing him. The prince's battle. The second match began immediately after. Prince Celerath versus Zyra of the Iron Claws. Zyra was one of the strongest warriors in the tournament. Her body was covered in natural armor-like scales, and her fists were like stone hammers. She had crushed every opponent she faced so far. But she was not fast enough for Accelerath. The moment the fight started, Accelerath moved like a shadow. He dodged every one of Zira's attacks and then delivered a devastating punch to her ribs. She roared in pain and swung her massive arms, but the prince was already behind her. With a single spinning kick to the head, Zira fell unconscious. The battle lasted less than a minute. The crowd was silent, then erupted into thunderous cheers. The final match was now set. It would be Commander Jason Holt versus Prince Accelerath, a human versus the greatest Zoran warrior. The final battle would decide who was truly the strongest. A tense meeting. That night, as Jason was resting, his door opened. It was Accelerath. The prince stepped inside, his golden eyes cold. "You are lucky to have made it this far, human." Jason stood up, his expression calm. Luck had nothing to do with it. Accelerath chuckled darkly. "Tomorrow, when we fight, I will break you." Jason smirked. "You can try." The tension in the room was thick. Both warriors knew what was coming. This was no longer just a tournament. This was a war between two rivals, and only one would stand victorious. The celestial arena had never been louder. Every seat was filled, and the air buzzed with excitement. Today was the final match. Today, the people would see who was truly the strongest warrior. The announcer's voice echoed across the stadium. Final battle. Commander Jason Holt versus Prince Accelerath. The crowd erupted in cheers and roars. Jason walked onto the battlefield, his mind calm, his heart steady. He had fought hard to get here. He had survived against some of the best warriors in the Empire. And now he stood face to face with his final opponent. Accelerath stood at the other side of the arena, his golden eyes burning with determination. He wore dark combat armor, his muscles tense, his posture like a coiled predator ready to strike. Jason met his gaze and smirked. "Ready to lose, Your Highness." Accelerath's expression did not change. "I do not lose, human. Today, I will show you your place." The tension was thick. The audience held their breath. Then, begin. The clash of rivals. Accelerath moved first, launching forward with blinding speed. Jason barely had time to react. The prince's fist came like a meteor, slamming into his ribs. Jason gasped as he was thrown backward, rolling across the ground. Pain burned through his body, but he forced himself to stand. The crowd cheered wildly as Accelerath smirked. "Is that all?" Jason wiped the blood from his lip and grinned. "Not even close." This time, Jason took the initiative. He dashed forward, dodging to the side at the last second and delivering a powerful elbow strike to Accelerath's side. The prince grunted but barely flinched. Instead, he grabbed Jason's arm and threw him over his shoulder. Jason hit the ground hard but rolled away just in time to avoid a crushing stomp from Accelerath's foot. The two warriors circled each other. Accelerath was stronger, faster. His Zoran body was built for combat. But Jason had something else. Strategy. Jason analyzed Accelerath's movements. The prince was powerful but had a pattern. He relied too much on overwhelming force. Jason needed to use that against him. Turning the tide. Accelerath charged again, aiming for a devastating punch. Jason sidestepped at the last second, causing the prince to miss, and in that brief moment of imbalance, Jason struck. He delivered a rapid series of punches and kicks, targeting the weak points in Accelerath's armor. The prince growled, swinging wildly, but Jason dodged each attack with precision. The crowd was on their feet. For the first time in the tournament, Accelerath was struggling. Jason pressed his advantage. He ducked under a wild punch, slid behind the prince, and landed a powerful kick to the back of his knee. Accelerath stumbled. Jason saw his chance. He twisted, gathering all his strength, and delivered a massive uppercut to Accelerath's jaw. The prince's head snapped back. He staggered, but he did not fall. Instead, Accelerath's golden eyes blazed with fury. Jason barely had time to react before the prince let out a mighty roar and tackled him to the ground. The prince's rage. Selarath rained down fist after fist, his strength like a hammer against Jason's defense. Jason blocked the first few punches, but he couldn't hold forever. One punch slipped through, slamming into his ribs. Jason gasped as pain exploded through his chest. Another punch, his vision blurred. The crowd gasped. Was this the end? Selarath stood over Jason, breathing heavily. You fought well, human, but this is over. He raised his fist for the final blow. But Jason smirked. Not yet. And with one last burst of strength, Jason rolled to the side, dodging the attack at the last second. Before Selarath could react, Jason kicked his leg out from under him. The prince fell to one knee. Jason took a deep breath. This was it. He clenched his fist and threw one final powerful punch. Right into Selarath's jaw. The prince collapsed. The arena fell silent. Then, cheers erupted. Jason stood over his fallen opponent, his body shaking from exhaustion. He had done it. He had won. He was the champion. Victory and respect. Jason turned toward the royal balcony. Princess Lyra was smiling. Emperor Zorvak's expression was unreadable, but after a long moment, he nodded in approval. Then, Jason felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned. Selarath was standing again, his golden eyes calm. You fought well, human, the prince admitted. You have earned this victory. Jason grinned. Told you I wasn't weak. Selarath chuckled. Perhaps not. The rivalry was not over. But today, Jason had proven himself. He had shown the galaxy that humans were not to be underestimated. And this was only the beginning. The celestial arena echoed with cheers. Jason Holt stood in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily. His body ached, his muscles burned, but he had won. He had defeated Prince Selarath in combat. He was now the champion of the grand tournament. The emperor himself, Zorvak the Unyielding, rose from his golden throne. His sharp, reptilian eyes studied Jason with silent respect. Then, with a commanding voice, he spoke. The human has proven his strength. He is worthy of victory. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Jason exhaled and looked at his fallen opponent. Selarath was still on the ground, recovering from the final punch. His golden eyes met Jason's, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Then, to Jason's surprise, Selarath smiled. It wasn't a smile of anger or defeat, it was respect. Selarath extended a hand. Jason hesitated for a second, but then grasped it firmly. The prince pulled himself up and patted Jason's shoulder. You fought well, human. Today, you were the better warrior. Jason smirked. Guess that means I win the tournament. Selarath chuckled. Yes, but next time, I won't hold back. Jason laughed. A new rivalry had been born. The Emperor's decision. After the fight, Jason was escorted to the Grand Palace. The royal hall was vast, decorated with ancient symbols and golden banners. It was a place of history, where only the strongest warriors were honored. Jason stood before Emperor Zorvak, Princess Lyra beside him. Selarath stood to the side, his arms crossed, watching silently. The Emperor's deep voice echoed in the hall. Jason Holt, you are the first human to ever win our greatest tournament. You have earned not only our respect, but a reward worthy of your strength. Jason stood tall. He had fought for this moment. The Emperor continued. As champion, you are granted one request. Speak, and it shall be given. The room was silent. Everyone was waiting for Jason's answer. Jason glanced at Lyra. Her blue eyes were full of anticipation. He could ask for anything: wealth, power, land, or a command position in the Empire. But Jason already knew what he wanted. He turned back to the Emperor and spoke clearly. I ask for the right to court Princess Lyra. The hall was silent. The emperor's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. The nobles and warriors in the room murmured among themselves, a human asking for the hand of the emperor's daughter. It was unheard of. But Jason stood his ground. He had earned this right. Lyra's face turned red, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. Emperor Zorvak studied Jason for a long moment. Then he turned to Lyra. "Daughter, what say you?" Lyra took a deep breath and looked at Jason. "I accept." The hall erupted into gasps and whispers. Even Selarath looked surprised. The emperor raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Then he looked at Jason again. And finally, after a long moment, he nodded. So be it. Jason had done the impossible. He had won the tournament. He had gained the respect of a powerful empire. And now, he had won the heart of the princess. A rivalry, a future. Later that night, Jason stood on the palace balcony, looking at the twin moons in the sky. Footsteps approached behind him. He turned to see Selarath standing there. The prince crossed his arms. "You've won everything today, but don't think it means you are better than me." Jason chuckled. "Still can't accept defeat." Selarath smirked. "I accept today's loss, but there will be more battles. Next time, I will win." Jason grinned. "I look forward to it." There was no hatred between them anymore, only respect. Selarath gave a final nod before walking away. Jason turned back to the stars, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He had arrived as a stranger, an outsider. Now he was a champion, a respected warrior, and a future prince. And this was only the beginning.